All right, as I mentioned, we are planning to study 2 Samuel chapters 20 and 21 today, and possibly, if there's enough time, 22. It kind of fits into a nice unit. If we were able to complete 20 to 22 today, then next week we would do 23 and 24 and actually finish up the book of 2 Samuel. The plan for our next book that we're going to study is 1st and 2nd Peter. So we've now been in the book of Samuel for quite a while. I think it's, by my count, about 36 weeks. And so we'll see how it goes today. I think that we'll do pretty well at completing 20 and 21. And 22 is a question. And we'll see, because 22 is a cool book, and it's mostly a song that David has written, and I think it's a pretty cool story. So if you'll turn with me to 2 Samuel chapter 20, we'll go ahead and get started with that. All right, so let's do our customary read through, and then we'll come back and unpack. Verse 1. Now, a troublemaker named Sheba, son of Bichri, a Benjamite, happened to be there. He sounded the trumpet and shouted, "We have no share in David, no part in Jesse's son. Every man to his tent, Israel." So all the men of Israel deserted David to follow Sheba, son of Bichri, but the men of Judah stayed by their king all the way from the Jordan to Jerusalem. When David returned to his palace in Jerusalem, he took the 10 concubines that he had left to take care of the palace and put them in a house under guard. He provided for them, but had no sexual relations with them. They were kept in confinement till the day of their death, living as widows. Then the king said to Amasa, "Summon the men of Judah to come to me within 3 days, and be here yourself." But when Amasa went to summon Judah, he took longer than the time the king had set for him. David said to Abishai, "Now Sheba, son of Berka, will do us more harm than Absalom did. Take your master's men and pursue him, or he will find fortified cities and escape from us." So Joab's men and the Kerethites and the Pelethites and all the mighty warriors went out under the command of Abishai. They marched out from Jerusalem to pursue Sheba, son of Berka, or Bichri. While they were at the great rock in Gibeon, Amasa came to meet them. Joab was wearing his military tunic, and strapped over it at his waist was a belt with a dagger in its sheath. As he stepped forward, it dropped out of the sheath. Joab said to Amasa, "How are you, my brother?" Then Joab took Amasa by the beard with his right hand to kiss him. Amasa was not on his guard against the dagger in Joab's hand, and Joab plunged it into his belly, and his intestines spilled out on the ground. Without being stabbed again, Amasa died. Then Joab and his brother Abishai pursued Sheba, son of Bichri. One of Joab's men stood beside Amasa and said, "Whoever favors Joab and whoever is for David, let him follow Joab." Amasa lay wallowing in his blood in the middle of the road, and the man saw that all the troops came to a halt there. When he realized that everyone who came up to Amasa stopped, he dragged him from the road into a field and threw a garment over him. After Amasa had been removed from the road, everyone went on with Joab to pursue Sheba, son of Bichri. Sheba passed through all the tribes of Israel to Abel Beth Maacah, and through the entire region of the Bichrites, who gathered together and followed him. All the troops with Joab came and besieged Sheba in Abel Beth Maacah, or Maacah. They built a siege ramp up to the city, and it stood against the outer fortifications. While they were battering the wall to bring it down, a wise woman came from the city. Listen, listen, tell Joab to come here so I can speak with him. He went towards her, and she asked, Are you Joab? I am, he answered. He said, Listen to what your servant has to say. I'm listening, he said. She continued, Long ago, they used to say, Get your answer at Abel, and that settled it. We are the peaceful and faithful in Israel. You are trying to destroy a city that is a mother in Israel. Why do you want to swallow up the Lord's inheritance? Be far it from me, Joab said. Be far it from me to swallow up or destroy. That is not the case. A man named Sheba, son of Bichri, from the hill country of Ephraim, has lifted up his hand against the king, against David. Hand over this one man, and I'll withdraw from the city. The woman said to Joab, His head will be thrown to you from the wall. Then the woman went to all the people with her wise advice, and they cut off the head of Sheba, son of Bichri, and threw it to Joab. So he sounded the trumpet, and all his men dispersed from the city, each returning to his home. And Joab went back to the king in Jerusalem. Verse 23, Joab was over Israel's entire army. Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, was over the Kerethites and the Pelethites. Adon Aram was in charge of forced labor. Jehoshaphat, son of Elihud, was recorder. Sheba was secretary. Zadok and Abiathar were priests, and Ira the Jerite was David's priest. All right. That is chapter 20. Thoughts or comments before we start to unpack it?
I think it's interesting that all of the 10 tribes would automatically just follow Sheba after they had said, okay, David, we're going to follow you now. So they were kind of worthless.
Yeah, the interesting thing here, Tom, is David is still on his march to return home to his palace and throne in Jerusalem, and another revolt starts out. And so, in chapter 19, what we read last week, there were people that ran to the border of Israel when David crossed the Jordan to welcome him in and ask him back in and have a celebration. But evidently, there was a large portion of the northern tribes, the northern 10 tribes of Israel, that were not so ready to have David back, and they listened to Sheba, who said, why are we doing this? And so he had another revolt on his hands, a rebellion on his hands. All right, so let's head back up to the top. Verse 1, Now a troublemaker named Sheba, son of Bichri, a Benjamite, happened to be there, and he sounded the trumpet and shouted, We have no share in David, no part in Jesse's son, every man to his tent, Israel. All right, so this Sheba, it's interesting that the text actually calls him a troublemaker. So this guy was known, and he wasn't necessarily known to be a quality person. He was known to cause trouble, and he was causing trouble here. But he had a voice, and for some reason, a large number of people were listening to what he had to say. And when he shouted and he sounded the trumpet, he was like stumping. He was trying to get everybody's attention. And he says, "We have no share in David, no part in Jesse's son." Now, this is going to become an important feature of this text and other texts that we're going to be studying shortly. To recall that in the Hebrew mind, good poetry and good speech is a rhyming of thoughts and not the rhyming of words. So what we're used to in the Western mind is the rhyming of words. But like I said, in the Hebrew style, what was considered good poetry was the rhyming of thoughts. And that's why he says, we have no share in David, And then he says the same thing again using different words, no part in Jesse's son. So he's basically repeating himself again, but he's using different words, and he's trying to make it fit together in the Hebrew style of rhyming. Then he says, every man to his tent, Israel. So does that mean that at this point that all of the Hebrews, all of the Israelites were still nomadic, living in tents? No, it's actually a euphemism. He's saying, everyone return to your homes. In other words, let's not celebrate David's return. Let's turn our backs on him and let's just go home. Verse 2, so all the men of Israel deserted David to follow Sheba, son of Bichri. But the men of Judah stayed by their king all the way from Jordan to Jerusalem. So again, we have this division that exists within the nation of Israel. David was successful in unifying the nation, but it seems like it didn't take a lot of encouragement for this division to reappear. And that division was between the 10 northern tribes, known generally as the tribes of Israel, and the 2 southern tribes, known as the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, or collectively the tribes of Judah. So it was the tribes of Israel, as Tom pointed out, that followed Sheba. But the tribes of Judah were stalwart supporters of David, and they did not leave him. Verse 3, when David returned to his palace in Jerusalem, he took the 10 concubines he had left to take care of the palace and put them in a house under guard. He provided for them, but had no sexual relations with them. They were kept in confinement till the day of their death, living as widows. Well, this is sort of a sad story for those 10 concubines. But if you'll remember from last week's lesson, as a fulfillment of part of the curse that God made on David, really a foretelling of the pain that David would experience because of his overt sin. Absalom slept with David's wives, David's concubines, the 10 that he left behind to watch over the palace when David and the rest of the household escaped Jerusalem and went over the Jordan and over to Mahanaim, the city of. And when David came back, it was like these concubines in David's mind had been defiled. And so instead of having them removed from the royal courts, or worse, he set them up in their own household. He didn't have relations with them again, and they were required to stay there until their deaths, living as widows. Kind of a sad story, really. Verse 4, then the king said to Amasa, summon the men of Judah to come to me within 3 days, and be here yourself. So you'll recall that Amasa was the captain of Absalom's armies. And David, as part of his return, even though Joab had been loyal to David and been functioning in the position of the captain of his armies, he supplanted Joab and gave the position to Amasa. Why would he do that? And there's, some disagreement in theological circles of why it was that David would have done that. Because again, Joab had been faithful during the rebellion. He was faithful before the rebellion. He was faithful to David during the rebellion. So why would he replace Joab? Well, it was likely that David had finally heard the truth, that it was Joab that killed Absalom with the javelin. So David, especially, what we know about how David mourned the loss of Absalom, even though Absalom was not a good son. Absalom wanted to remove his father from the kingdom. He wanted to take over the throne, and he was willing to do it by force. And if given the opportunity, he would have killed David. David still mourned the loss of Absalom, and it's likely that David was taking out the loss of Absalom on Joab. There was also, we saw in last week's lesson, it was Joab that basically told David, hey, enough of this mourning thing. You're such a downer. You're bringing the whole nation down. And instead of celebrating those who fought for you, who died for you, so that you could remain in power, you're doing this mourning thing. You need to stop. And David did. I don't know that David appreciated that admonition, that guidance from Joab, but he did. He stopped and he started acting like a king again. And that's when he began his return to Jerusalem and the palace. So those things together, could have made it so that David wasn't so keen on Joab, and that's why he placed Amasa in Joab's role of captain of the armies. But Amasa isn't there very long, is he? So back to verse 4. Then the king said to Amasa, summon the men of Judah to come to me within 3 days and be here yourself. But when Amasa went to summon Judah, he took longer than the king had set for him. So here, Amasa is getting his first assignment from David, and Amasa is taking his time. Matter of fact, he's taken too much time to be obedient, to follow through the instruction that he was given to gather the men of Judah and be there himself within 3 days. Verse 6, David said to Abishai, now Sheba son of Bichri will do us more harm than Absalom did. Take your master's men and pursue him, or he will find fortified cities and escape from us. So if they could find Sheba out in the open, it would be a whole lot less difficult to capture him than if he was hiding or taking refuge in a fortified city. Because just as almost did happen, then they would have had to take siege of the city and take the city by force to be able to get Sheba, who was hiding inside. So David says to Abishai, because why? Well, Amasa is out, supposedly gathering the men of Judah, and Joab isn't there present. But Abishai is the brother of Joab, and he's also functioning here as the second in command of the armies. So David tells him that Sheba will do more harm than Absalom did if we allow this thing to continue. So take your master's men, his master was Joab, take your master's men and pursue him. So Joab's men and the Kerethites, we're on verse 7 now, Joab's men and the Kerethites and the Pelethites and all the mighty warriors went out under the command of Abishai. Again, Abishai is now functioning as the second in command. Who are the Kerethites and the Pelethites? Well, we've ran across them a few times while we've been studying in the book of Samuel. And the Kerethites and the Pelethites were not native to Israel, but they were mercenaries. So David did make use of mercenaries to build up his army. So, and then there were David's mighty men, and these were the experienced, the seasoned soldiers that were Israelites under David's command. So it was not a small group is what it amounts to. The Kerethites, the Pelethites, and the mighty warriors, and all of the mighty warriors, went out under the command of Abishai. They marched out from Jerusalem to pursue Sheba, the son of Bichri. Verse 8, while they were at the great rock in Gibeon, Amasa came to meet them. Joab was wearing his military tunic, and strapped over it at his waist was a belt with a dagger in its sheath. As he stepped forward, it dropped out of the sheath. All right, so this great rock in Gibeon was a local landmark. So we don't know where that rock is today, except that it was, as the text says, somewhere in Gibeon. But it would have been a known location that when the original readers of the text, it might have still existed at the time. So Amasa is out there. He is supposed to be gathering the men of Judah. And when he saw David's troops, when he saw Joab, when he saw Abishai, Amasa comes to greet him. It's interesting that we get a description of Joab here as wearing his military tunic. So he was dressed ready for battle. Strapped over his tunic at the waist was a belt with a dagger in its sheath. Now here's the little bit of intrigue. As he stepped forward, it dropped out of the sheath. Now, what is not clear is Was the dagger dropping out of the sheath a diversion? And did Joab already have another dagger in his hand? So he was using the knife that dropped out of its sheath. He was using it as a misdirection? Or did the knife falling out of the sheath and probably into the folds of his tunics provide a convenient opportunity for him to get a dagger in his hand? Either way, Joab uses a dagger to stab and kill Amasa. Verse 9, Joab said to Amasa, "How are you, my brother?" Then Joab took Amasa by the beard with his right hand to kiss him. This was not an unusual motion. This was not an unusual act. It was a kiss of greeting. It was not a kiss on the lips, but to grab a man's beard to give him a kiss of greeting would have not been unusual. It would not have alerted Amasa to an unusual or threatening situation. Verse 10, Amasa was not on his guard against the dagger in Joab's hand, and Joab plunged it into his belly, and his intestines spilled out on the ground. That's graphic. Without being stabbed again, Amasa died. That one stab, and probably it was more than a stab. For his intestines to fall out, it was probably a slice. But that's all it took. That one action of Joab is all it took to kill Amasa. Verse 11, one of Joab's men stood beside Amasa and said, "Whoever favors Joab and whoever is for David, let him follow Joab." So Joab's men are now saying, well, okay, no matter what David said, Joab, he was our leader before, he's our leader now. Verse 12, Amasa lay wallowing in his blood in the middle of the road, and the men saw that all the troops came there to halt. So all the troops, as they passed by, they're standing around. They're looking at what happened to Amasa. So when he realized, let me start over again so this flows. Amasa lay wallowing in his blood in the middle of the road, and the men saw that all the troops came to halt there. When he realized that everyone who came up to Amasa stopped, he dragged him from the road into a field and threw a garment over him, which is what they should have done from the very beginning. Verse 13, after Amasa had been removed from the road, everyone went on with Joab to pursue Sheba, son of Bichri. All right, so now the campaign is back on focus. Amasa is dead. Joab has forcefully taken back his position of captain of the army. Abishai is still there, and he is still operating as his second. No doubt there was animosity between Joab and Amasa, and that Joab felt that he didn't deserve, after being loyal to David during the rebellion, that he didn't deserve to be supplanted by Amasa. So Joab decided that he would seize an opportunity and take Amasa out. Verse 14, Sheba passed through all the tribes of Israel to Abel Beth Maacah, and through the entire region of the Bichrites. So he's on the run, and he's running through the entire region of Israel, and he's looking for somebody that's going to harbor him, that's going to shelter him. Verse 15, all the troops with Joab came and besieged Sheba in Abel Beth Maacah. They built a siege ramp up to the city, and it stood against the outer fortifications. While they were battering the walls to bring it down, a wise woman called from the city, listen, tell Joab to come here so I can speak with him. He went towards her and she asked, are you Joab? I want to back up just a little bit, because we get a little picture, a little insight into the battle methodologies, the war methodology being used at the time. I don't know about you, but, in my mind, I have visions probably from the movie world, of the Romans setting up siege ramps and battering down the walls of the city, or the gates of the city. And but this goes, this practice, military practice, goes much further before the Romans. We're talking somewhere in the area of 900 BC right now. So this is something that they did. They built a siege ramp up to the city So they weren't going to ask any questions. They knew that Sheba was inside the city walls, and what David had feared, that Sheba would try and take shelter or hide in a fortified city. That's what actually happened. So to combat that, they built a siege ramp to the city, and it stood against the outer fortifications. While they were battering the wall to bring it down, a wise woman, now this would have been a woman who was older and experienced and knowledgeable, that people in the city knew and listened to. She takes it upon herself to say, look, there's no reason for you to batter down the walls of our city. There's no reason for you to take siege upon us. Why are you here? She says to Joab, listen, tell Joab to come here so I can speak to him. He went towards her, and she asked, are you Joab? I am, he answered. She said, listen to what your servant has to say. So his servant, your servant that she's referring to, is there herself. So she's addressing him respectfully. She said, listen to what your servant has to say. I'm listening, he said. She continued, long ago they used to say, get your answer at Abel, that will settle it. We are the peaceful and faithful in Israel. You are trying to destroy a city that is a mother in Israel. Why do you want to swallow up the Lord's inheritance? So she's asking, what grounds are you here? We have no idea why you're here. What is it that we've done? What is it that has brought you here and wanting to destroy our city? And, we have been considered as being the wise people. If you're confused on what you should do, the saying used to be that you go to Abel and find out, because they have wise counsel available in the city of Abel. So why are you here? Let's talk about this before you do something so rash as breaking down our city walls, our city defenses. Let's talk about this. What is it you want? Verse 20, far be it from me, Joab replied. Far be it from me to swallow up or destroy. That is not the case. What Joab is trying to say to her is, look, I don't want to destroy your city. I don't want to break down your defenses, but you got this guy who's hiding in your city. That's who we're here for. We're here for this guy, this Sheba, son of Bichri. He was from the hill country of Ephraim, and he has lifted up his hand against the king, against David. Hand over this one man, and I'll withdraw from the city. Now it's interesting, we kind of think that this was at this time especially was Israel was a patriarchal society. So how much of a voice did women have? Well, this particular wise woman that's talked about here, people in the town of Abel, they listened to her. The woman said to Joab, his head will be thrown to you from the wall. Now, this will be graphic proof. I will tell you, we will take care of this situation. Leave it to us. I will graphically show you that we will be faithful to our word, and we will deliver Sheba to you. Then the woman went to all the people with her wise advice, and they cut off the head of Sheba, son of Bichri, and threw it to Jacob. So they followed through. The people inside the city followed through with the words, the commitment that this wise woman made to Joab, and graphically showed that they had taken Sheba away. They didn't need his whole body. Just his head was enough proof to say that Sheba had been neutralized and was no longer a threat to David. So Joab sounded the trumpet, and his men dispersed from the city, each returning to his home. And Joab went back to the king in Jerusalem. So the good thing about this situation was that the wise woman spoke up and said, look, I have no idea. I don't understand the reason why you're here and wanting to destroy us. Tell us what it is that you're after. And Joab says, we're after one man. His name is Sheba, and he's hiding inside your city walls. The wise woman says, give me a minute. We can take care of this. And I'm going to deliver Sheba's head to you. And Joab was faithful to his word to the wise woman. And as soon as they had Sheba's head, then he sounded the trumpet, the men dispersed, and everybody went home. And then Joab went to the king in Jerusalem. again, Joab has forcefully reasserted himself back into the role of the captain of the armies, and he triumphantly returns back to David with the head of Sheba as fulfilling the directive of what David originally charged Amasa with. Well, actually, he charged Amasa with gathering men of Judah. David's plan was that from the men of Judah that they were going to put together a force to seek Sheba, and Joab and Abishai took the situation in their own hands and said, look, we're the professionals here. We're going to go ahead and get this done. Verse 23, Joab was over Israel's entire army. Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, was over the Kerethites and the Pelethites. Adon-Aram was in charge to force labor. Jehoshaphat, son of Elihud, was recorder. Sheba was secretary. Zadok and Abiathar were priests, and Ira, the Jerite, was David's priest. So what is this little codicil here that's inserted at the end of chapter 20? And what it is it's a listing of David's government. So for whatever reason, the writer of 2 Samuel thought it was important now to establish who was in David's government, who was in David's leadership, in David's reestablished kingdom. Because David has returned from being on the run during Absalom's rebellion. He's now returned to Jerusalem and established himself in the palace and on the throne. So Joab remains the captain over Israel's armies. Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, was over the mercenaries, the Kerethites and the Pelethites. Adon-Aram was in charge to force labor. Question is asked whether or not before this point in time did the Israelites use forced labor. Most likely they were people that had been captured, like Philistines, POWs, and they were using the forced labor for their own building projects. Because it's a real question mark. You know, the Israelites were forced labor for the pharaohs in Egypt. Why would they do that to another people? The question is asked. We don't have an answer to that, but we do have this mention here of Adon-Aram being in charge to force labor. Jehoshaphat, son of Elihud, was recorder. So this recorder would have been a very important position within the government, and he was likely a scribe and historian. Sheba was the secretary, likely the Secretary of State, so he was the person charged with foreign policy. And then Zadok and Abiathar were co-high priests. We've mentioned that in the past, that both Zadok and Abiathar shared the high priest position during David's administration. And then Ira the Jerite was David's priest. So there were the high priests that were in charge of the religious infrastructure of Israel. And then Ira was David's personal priest. Thoughts, comments before we move on to chapter 21?
Hey, Barry, kind of big picture question. I may repeat some things you said before. So this is a time there's instability under David, right? I mean, he's had people faithful to him, but man, there's a lot of discord and instability underneath. The outside people rebelling, inside people ignoring his orders. I don't know. What's the big picture? Is it just a foreshadowing of like his management style? It's not a great management situation. You know what I mean? So,
John, thank you for the question, because you brought out an important point. David is still experiencing the pain and the heartache that God told him he would experience as a result of David's sin. The interesting thing to me is that David never complains once. He knows exactly what's going on. He knows that he's still experiencing the pain, the suffering that God told him he would experience because of his unfaithfulness, of his committing murder, having Bathsheba's husband killed, having born the son that got sick and died. David never complains because he knows exactly what's going on, and he knows that he is reaping what he sowed. And so that's why this stuff is still happening to David. Good question. Like I said, David never complains about it. He never questions it. He never shakes his fist on God. He knows that he did wrong, and he knows that he's suffering the consequences. Still suffering the consequences. So Absalom created this situation, this period of instability. Sheba wanted it to continue. He didn't want David to reestablish himself back in the throne in Jerusalem. That was put down, and it's not the end of David's troubles. All right, let's move to chapter 21. Let's do our read through, and then we'll start to unpack. Chapter 21, verse 1. During the reign of David, there was a famine for 3 successive years. So David sought the face of the Lord. And the Lord said, "It is on account of Saul and his blood-stained house. It is because he put the Gibeonites to death. The king summoned the Gibeonites and spoke to them. Now the Gibeonites were not part of Israel, but were survivor of the Amorites. The Israelites had sworn to spare them, but Saul, in his zeal for Israel and Judah, had tried to annihilate them. David asked the Gibeonites, "What shall I do for you? How shall I make atonement so that you will bless the Lord's inheritance?" The Gibeonites answered him, "We have no right to demand silver or gold from Saul or his family, nor do we have the right to put anyone in Israel to death." "What do you want me to do for you?" David asked. They answered the king, "As for the man who destroyed us and plotted against us so that we have been decimated and have no place anywhere in Israel, let 7 of his male descendants be given to us to be killed, and their bodies exposed before the Lord at Gibeah of Saul, the Lord's chosen one." So the king said, "I will give them to you." The king spared Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, because of the oath before the Lord between David and Jonathan, son of Saul. But the king took Armoni and Mephibosheth, the 2 sons of Aiah's daughter Rizpah, whom she had borne to Saul, together with the 5 sons of Saul's daughter Merab, whom she had borne to Adriel, son of Barzillai. Sorry for my troubles with pronunciation this morning. Maholathite. He handed them over to the Gibeonites, who killed them and exposed their bodies on a hill before the Lord. All 7 of them fell together. They were put to death the first days of the harvest, just as the barley harvest was beginning. Rizpah, daughter of Ai, took sackcloth and spread it out for herself on a rock. From the beginning of the harvest till the rain poured down from the heavens on the body, she did not let the birds touch them by day, nor the wild animals by night. Then David was told what Ai's daughter Rizpah, Saul's concubine, had done. Or he went and took the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan from the citizens of Jabesh Gilead. They had stolen their bodies from the public square at Bethshan, where the Philistines had hung them after they struck down Saul of Gilboa. David brought the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan from there, and the bones of those who had been killed were exposed were gathered up. They buried the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan in the tomb of Saul's father Kish at Zelah in Benjamin, and did everything the king commanded. After that, God answered prayer in behalf of the land. Once again, there was a battle between the Philistines and Israel. David went down with his men to fight against the Philistines, and he became exhausted. And Ishbi-Benob, one of the descendants of Rapha, whose bronze spear had weighed 300 shekels, and who was armed with a new sword, said that he would kill David. But Abishai, son of Ruiah, came to David's rescue. He struck the Philistine down and killed him. Then David's men swore to him, saying, "Never again will you go out with us to battle, so that the lamp of Israel will not be extinguished." In the course of time, there was another battle with the Philistines at Gob, and at that time, Sibekiah, the Hushathite killed Saph, one of the descendants of Rapha. In another battle, the Philistines at Gob, Elhanan, son of Jair, the Bethlehemite, killed the brother of Goliath the Gittite, who had a spear with a shaft like a weaver's rod. In still another battle, which took place at Gath, there was a huge man with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in all. He also was descended from Rapha. When he taunted Israel, Jonathan, son of Shemiah, David's brother, killed him. These were 4 descendants of Rapha and Gath, and they fell at the hands of David and his men. Strange chapter. Can you see that what we are reading here is not necessarily in a chronological order? And the writer of Samuel is basically here, and with the start of the end of the chapter 20, where we got the details of David's administration, the people that were leaders in David's government, and then this, we're seeing really the creation of an appendix, or the beginnings of an appendix that is being written towards the end of the book of Samuel. And what we're seeing wrapped up here is, yes, additional battles against the Philistines. And to John's point earlier, during David's entire administration, they were always at war with the Philistines. The times of true peace were momentary, and it seemed like that they were, after very long, back fighting against the Philistines again. All right, let's go back up to verse 1 and see what we've got here. During the reign of David, there was a famine for 3 successive years. So famine was not an unusual thing to experience in this part of the world. Part of the reason for that is the climate. It is an arid climate. The temperatures are not that different from Southern California and some of the high desert areas. Water was always scarce. The people were dependent on rains to irrigate their crops. It wasn't like the Egyptians, and they could irrigate using water off the Nile. They didn't have a large river like that they could do that with. Or the Sea of Galilee was a fresh water source, but that's in the north. The Dead Sea is so salty that you couldn't use it for irrigation. It would kill the crops. So water was always an issue. And if there was any period of drought, it would always be succeeded by a period of famine. So a famine had existed for 3 years. And David, being a good king, did what a good king is supposed to do, and that is that he sought the Lord. The text says, so David sought the face of the Lord. During the reign of David, there was a famine for 3 successive years. So David sought the face of the Lord. So having a famine for 3 years in a row, 3 years running, was not typical. It created a hardship on the nation. So David went to God and said, why is this happening? The Lord speaks to David and says, it is on account of Saul and his blood-stained house. It is because he put the Gibeonites to death. Does this situation occur after the rebellion of Absalom, after the rebellion of Sheba? We don't think so. We're not quite exactly sure where in David's reign this is occurring. Again, the details in this chapter are not in a particular chronology or chronological order. But we're being told some of the facts of David's reign. There was a 3-year famine. David goes to the Lord, and he asks, why is this happening? Is this a judgment from you? What have we done? And God responds to David and said that it's on account of Saul and his bloodstained house. It is because he put the Gibeonites to death. What does this matter? You might recall that way back during the campaigns of Joshua, as the Israelites are moving into the promised land, Joshua makes an oath to protect the Gibeonites in Joshua chapter 9. Saul, in his patriotic zeal, actually killed a bunch of the Gibeonites, ignoring the oath that Joshua had made to protect the Gibeonites. The Gibeonites were not Hebrews, they were foreigners, and they sort of tricked Joshua into thinking that they were allies, and Joshua making an oath to protect them. But regardless, Saul ignored that oath, had blood on his hands, and God was angry. And Saul was representing, as the anointed king, he was representing the nation of Israel. And so God was angry with the nation of Israel. And why would that be? What does that matter? Because Israel was supposed to be a righteous nation. And a righteous nation is always true and good to its word. And yet Saul, in his zeal, killed the Gibeonites. Now, where in Scripture do we find that Saul killed the Gibeonites? We don't. We're being told of a situation that doesn't seem to have recorded in the Bible anywhere else but here. So we don't know exactly when it happened that Saul did this, but it was a big deal to God, and God made it a big deal to David. So David says, what is it that we can do to make things right? Verse 2, the king summoned the Gibeonites and spoke to them. Now the Gibeonites were not part of Israel, but were survivor of the Amorites. The Israelites had sworn to spare them, but Saul, in his zeal for Israel and Judah, had tried to annihilate them. We're told that the Gibeonites were not part of Israel, they were foreigners, but were survivor of the Amorites. So the Amorites were Canaanite people. And oftentimes the Amorite is a catch-all for multiple Canaanite tribes or multiple Canaanite people. So we don't know exactly which of the Canaanite peoples the Gibeonites came from. They're kind of lumped into this category of Amorites. The Israelites had sworn to spare them, but Saul, in his zeal for Israel and Judah, had tried to annihilate them. Again, we don't know exactly when that happened. It's not recorded in Scripture. Verse 3, David asked the Gibeonites, what shall I do for you? How shall I make atonement so that you will bless the Lord's inheritance? The Lord's inheritance is a euphemism, or it's a phrase used to refer to the nation of Israel, the people of Israel, God's inheritance. So what is it that we can do to make things right, is what David is asking. Verse 4, the Gibeonites answered him, we have no right to demand silver or gold from Saul or his family. The Gibeonites are saying, you can't really give us money for restitution. We really have no right to ask for restitution, at least monetarily. We have no right to demand gold or silver from Saul or his family, nor do we have the right to put anyone to death in Israel. So that's not what they were asking for. David says, what do you want me to do for you? Verse 5, they answered the king, as for the man who destroyed us and plotted against us so that we have been decimated and have no place anywhere in Israel. No place, they have no lands. So Saul is the man, and he so decimated them that they've been basically left without a home, even though they've been living in Israel for centuries. Verse 6, let 7 of his male descendants, Saul's male descendants, be given to us and be killed, and their bodies exposed before the Lord at Gibeah of Saul, the Lord's chosen one. Okay, a couple of interesting features here. Let 7 of his male descendants. They're not asking for all of Saul's descendants, which there aren't many left, but they're asking for 7. Why 7? Because 7 is the number of completeness. So the Gibeonites are giving David an out. And by quote unquote sacrificing or hanging 7 of Saul's male descendants, symbolically, it will be a complete retribution or what's the word I was looking for? A return, a fulfillment. It will fulfill the requirements of what the Gibeonites require. Male descendants, because they're not looking to commit genocide. Their purpose is not to wipe out Saul's family, even though Saul attempted to wipe them out, to annihilate the Gibeonite people. We're going to expose their bodies before the Lord at Gibeah of Saul. Now, Gibeah of Saul was Saul's hometown. So that's why they were going to do the hanging there. It's actually a very purposeful designed plan. 7 male descendants, 7 being the number of completeness, in Saul's hometown. They were going to publicly do this thing and to make them a spectacle. Recognizing the Lord's chosen one, who was? God chose Saul to be the first king. He wasn't a good king, but he was chosen. So the king said, I will give them to you. So David said, that is a reasonable request. Verse 7, the king spared Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, because of the oath before the Lord between David and Jonathan, the son of Saul. So David isn't about to take out or include Mephibosheth in these 7 males. He spares him because of the oath that he had made personally with Jonathan, that each of them would protect each other's families if something were to happen to the other. Verse 8, but the king took Armoni and Mephibosheth. This is a different Mephibosheth. It tells us the 2 sons of Ai's daughter Rizpah, whom she had borne to Saul, together with 5 sons of Saul's daughter Merab. There you go. 2 plus 5 equals 7. Whom she had borne to Adriel, son of Barzillai, the Maholathite. He handed them over to the Gibeonites, who killed them and exposed their bodies on a hill before the Lord. All 7 of them fell together. It's all done at the same time. Wasn't done one after the other, all at the same time. Why would you do that? Because it is excruciating to wait in line and know that, okay, the first hanging is done. Now the 6 remaining have to watch and anticipate. And then the 6th is hung, and then the 5 remaining have to watch and anticipate. And instead, they did it all at once. All 7 of them fell together, the hanging. They were put to death during the first days of the harvest, just as the barley harvest was beginning. You remember that the barley comes in first, and then the wheat comes in later. Rizpah, daughter of Ai, took sackcloth and spread it out herself on a rock from the beginning of the harvest till the rain poured down from the heavens on the body, so she did not let the birds touch them by day or the wild animals by night. So Rizpah spread out sackcloth on the bodies so that they wouldn't be picked on by the birds, the carrion, and wouldn't be ripped apart by wild animals. She was trying to respect the bodies. When David was told what Ai's daughter Rizpah, Saul's concubine, had done, he went and took the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan from the Syrians of Jabesh Gilead. They had stolen their bodies from the public square at Bethshan, where the Philistines had hung them after they struck down Saul of Gilboa. You remember that Saul and the bodies of Saul and Jonathan were hung on the wall of Bethshan. So that's what this is referring to. They had stolen the bodies from the public square at Bethshan, where the Philistines had hung them after they struck down Saul on Gilboa. David brought the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan from there, and the bones of those who had been killed and exposed were gathered up. David is doing an act of respect to Saul's remains, to Jonathan's remains, and to those that had been killed to satisfy the Gibeonites. Verse 14, they buried the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan in the tomb of Saul's father Kish at Zelah in Benjamin, and did everything the king commanded. After that, God answered prayer in behalf of the land. So God was no longer upset with Israel because of this situation. What David did in going to the Lord, finding out why it was that the Lord was unhappy, why it was that the Lord was causing this famine. It's interesting to note that David didn't go to God and ask him what was going on. Was he displeased with the nation after year 1 or even after year 2? But he did it after year 3. And I think that's because they, frequently went through periods of drought and famine, but it was unusual to have 3 years in a row. And this caused David to think, maybe there's something more going on here. Maybe I need to go to God and ask him, what have we done? How have we made you unhappy? In the process of fulfilling the, providing restitution to the oath made by Joshua to the Gibeonite peoples, David has the opportunity to show respect to the remains of Saul and of Jonathan and to properly take care of them. And then we have verse 15, and we're going to finish up things here. So you'll recall that as a young boy, David says, I'll fight the giant. I don't know why you guys are all so scared of this guy. I'll fight him. And David goes through the process of trying on Saul's armor, and it's too big and it's too heavy. And the shepherd boy, who's had plenty of time to practice his rock throwing skills, he goes out and he picks out 5 smooth stones. Now, sometimes you'll hear some preachers and read some commentaries that say that David was being properly prepared. He knew that God would direct his stone. He only needed 1 stone to kill the giant. But he gathered 4 additional stones so that he would be properly prepared. He held them in reserve, and they used that as a lesson that we all need to be properly prepared. That we need to have things in reserve so that if the unexpected happens, that we're ready to address those things. And that misses the point. And the point is that Goliath had 4 sons. And David knew this. And he gathered 5 stones, 1 for Goliath and 1 for each of Goliath's sons. In case, in retribution, they decided that they too wanted to fight with David. And what we are seeing here succinctly is those 4 sons coming to do battle against Israel. They are in the Philistine army, and one by one, those 4 sons are killed by the Israelites. When it says descendants of Rapha, the Hebrew is actually Raphaim, and what Raphaim means is giant. So once again, there was a battle between the Philistines and Israel. David went down with his men to fight against the Philistines, and they became exhausted. Oh yeah, that's an important feature here. And Ishbi-Benob, one of the descendants of Rapha, whose bronze spearhead weighed 300 shekels, that's about 7 pounds. A 7-pound spearhead is a heavy spearhead to chuck at someone. And who was armed with a new sword, said that he would kill David. But Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, came to rescue David. He struck the Philistine down and killed him. Then David's men swore to him, saying, never again will you go out to battle with us, so that the lamp of Israel is not extinguished. David is now an old man, and he wants to be out with the young guys, with the soldiers, to fight against the Philistines, as he has almost his entire life. But now David becomes exhausted. David does not have the stamina he used to have when he was younger. And so Abishai takes care of the threat. He puts down the giant on David's behalf. And then David's men, David's military leaders, say to him, you can never come out to us to battle anymore. They don't say, because you're an old man. Notice, they don't. They don't say, because you're an old man. They say, so that the lamp of Israel will not be extinguished. David, we can't have anything bad happen to you. And unfortunately, you are a danger to yourself and you're a danger to others. Verse 18, in the course of time, there was another battle with the Philistine at Gob, the Philistine at Gob. At that time, Sabekiah, the Hushathite, killed Saph, one of the descendants of Rapha. In another battle with the Philistines at Gob, Elihan, son of Jair, the Bethlehemite, killed the brother of Goliath the Gittite, so that's the Goliath we know, who had a spear with a shaft like a weaver's rod. Well, a weaver's rod is a thick shaft, right? So that's the description of how big this spear was. And still another battle, which took place in Gath, that's the Philistine city of Gath, where David lived for 7 years, by the way. There was a huge man with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in all. He also descended from Rapha, or Raphaim, the giants. When he taunted Israel, Jonathan, son of Shemiah, David's brother, killed him. These 4 were descendants of Rapha in Gath, and they fell at the hands of David and his men. This chapter wraps up David's military career. We're out of time for today, but when we go to the next chapter, chapter 22, what we're going to see is a psalm that David wrote. And David wrote it towards the end of his life, when he was, through experience and time, a wiser person. And I think it's a really cool song that David has written. Again, it's important to realize that what we're seeing here in the final chapters of the book of 2 Samuel is not in a chronological order. Closing thoughts, comments? All right, if there aren't any, then please have a good rest of your week, gentlemen, and please go with God.
Thanks, Barry. Thanks, Barry.